Hi everyone, Matt here from Proof Fly Fishing. Welcome back. In our last video, we prepped our wraps for finish and we applied finish. So by this point, the rod is almost done. The last thing we're going to do is install the reel seat. So I want to talk about a couple different reel seats. Today I'm going to use an all-metal reel seat, which comes pretty much fully assembled. We're going to have to epoxy on the end cap, but that's it. Now, a lot of reel seats are going to come in various pieces. So this is one with a wood insert. It's an up-locking reel seat, similar to the one we're using. But I wanted to show you, kind of walk you through how to go ahead and assemble those. So you've got the threaded barrel with a locking nut on it, and most lock nuts on nice reel seats are going to have a little piece of like a hard plastic that's going to provide a little bit of cushion between the lock nut and the first collar. And what that's doing is just allowing you to really cinch it down tight so it doesn't come undone. So what we want to do is make sure that little piece of plastic is facing the wood insert. And then we're going to just put a little bit of epoxy on the insert itself. Again, have a piece of paper towel handy when you do that, because when you put these two together, they fit pretty tight, and chances are you're going to get a little epoxy pushing out the end. And so you just want to have something to be able to clean that off before that epoxy starts to cure. So once that's together, the reel seat is pretty much assembled. You want to make sure you have a collar that's going to slip on here. Make sure it's facing the right direction. It never hurts to double check, because I hear stories all the time of people that put reel seats on backwards or put the collar on backwards, and then they're trying to figure out how to take the thing off and fix it. So just be careful, take your time. We've got the inlet, or the hood that's going to go inside of the grip. So what you want to do here, this is the piece that you need to be very careful when you align it, because if you look at it, and I'll show you a close-up here, it has a little cutaway where the reel foot goes. So when you slip this on, you want to make sure, if you have a guide on this first section, or if you're using a label or a hook keeper, that that reel is going to be placed where you want it. So you don't want your hook keeper sticking straight up when you're fishing. You want that generally on the bottom. And so by aligning the reel seat to it, you'll make sure that that's the case. So you can align that by sight. So if our hook keeper was facing up here, we would want the reel foot to match that. So if you're having a hard time kind of aligning those two, what you can do is take a piece of guide tape, the green tape we used earlier, and just put it right over top of the grip, and then center that inlet in the hardware to that, and you should be all set. What I like to do is epoxy this piece into the cork first. And you don't even have to wait for it to dry, but once it's aligned, then you can just take the rest of it, and once everything's fit, which we're going to go over in a minute, you simply slide the whole thing together and hold it until that epoxy starts to set up. And it's important to hold it because things can move around. If you get a little air trapped in there, sometimes it can push the seat off. So, you know, if you're using a quick set, I'm going to use a 5-minute epoxy. Just hold it in place for 2 or 3 minutes until that epoxy gets nice and firm, and you should be all set. But I wanted to show you on this metal reel seat. The metal reel seats tend to have a very large opening, and they can accommodate pretty big blanks. But in this case, it's too big for the blank that we're using. So what we're going to do, we take our 1/2-inch masking tape, and we create a series of little dams along the blank. You don't have to worry about the actual strength of the tape, because the tape is just acting like a mold for the epoxy. The epoxy that we're going to use is going to flow over top of the tape and have access to the blank between those dams, and it's going to form a rock solid bond to keep our reel seat in place. So the way we do that is we just pull off pieces, and again, we space them out. I space these out about 1/8 inch apart, and we just wrap that tape on there and build up the size of that blank until it roughly corresponds to the opening in the reel seat. Now, you don't want the reel seat to fit tight. You don't want to be struggling to get the reel seat on because that's going to not leave any room for epoxy. So we want to leave just a little bit of room. So get it close. We want it to be nicely centered on the blank, and if the dams aren't big enough, then your reel seat's gonna be able to move around on you like that. So get it very close to a tight fit, and then back it off just a little bit, and you should be all set. So this one's pretty much fit. Again, I'm gonna check the alignment here. I don't have anything on this part of the blank, so I don't have to worry about aligning it to a hook keeper or a stripping guide, so we're all set there. Another thing, to assemble it and make sure you measured everything correctly, that the inside of the blank is not sticking out the back end. If it is, just get a fine-tooth saw and you can cut off a little bit. It's not going to be a big deal, but we definitely don't want, because when we come to install our end cap, we don't want that blank pushing it out the back. That's pretty much it. So I'm going to go ahead and epoxy this in place. When we do epoxy it, you want to put just a little bit on the inside of that of the cork. You don't need too much. And then again, because we have a fairly tight fit, we don't need a tremendous amount. You can fill those little gaps and then just put a very thin coat over top of the tape itself, because we don't want too much excess epoxy. And again, have something handy so that if you do get any of that squeezes out, you can clean it up before that hardens on you. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this up a minute. Again, we don't need a whole lot. I'm going to use actually a pretty small amount. That's all I have, because we have a really solid fit going into this already. So we're not having to fill huge gaps or compensate for a sloppy fit. So here we have it, our two parts. I'm going to mix those together. This is 5-minute epoxy, so I'm going to mix it together for, I don't know, roughly 30 seconds. Again, once you've worked with this stuff for a while, you'll be able to just kind of look at it and you'll be able to feel when those two parts are mixed. But 30 seconds is a good rule to start with. I can see this one starting to change color just a little bit, and I can feel the texture kind of firming up, so I know it's very close. And it should be good now. Okay, so first thing, a little epoxy on the inside of that inlet to keep everything in place there. Just like that. And then we're going to take the bulk of the epoxy and we're going to spread it over top, getting into those dams, those gaps that we left in there. And we're going to spread it out over top of the tape, because that's going to have the contact with the actual reel seat. And go all the way to the back. Again, those gaps don't have to be full, but you certainly want some in there. Just kind of work it in there, get it over top of everything, make sure everything's nice and evenly coated. And then I like to knock off any extra with just kind of smoothing the top of that epoxy out, because it can get pretty messy if you get too much epoxy underneath that reel seat. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to take my reel seat and slowly push it on. You can see I'm not building up too much, which tells me I have just the right amount of epoxy on there. And very carefully, we're going to push it and make sure you get a nice solid fit between the reel seat and the back of that cork. We're going to check for any extra epoxy, which in this case I don't have. Everything looks pretty good. And now, like before, we're just going to hold it in place for a couple minutes to make sure that nothing moves around while that epoxy is setting up. Once you get that done, the last thing you're going to do, you're going to have an end cap on this rail seat, and a good thing to do before you glue the end cap on is to take a little epoxy and just seal the back of that blank. That's going to give you double assurance that no water is going to get in there. And then take the end cap and line the inside of that threaded barrel with a little bit of epoxy, and then just push that in place until it dries. I don't have epoxy on it right now, so I'm going to do that in a minute. But once you're done with all that, in the last video, next time we're going to go over just a few basics as far as taking care of the rod, how to make small adjustments if you feel one of the wraps and you notice that the finish isn't quite right, how to clean that up, and then we'll be all set. So thanks. I look forward to seeing you next time, and we're getting very close to being done. Thanks.